Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayam Namaskritya Naram Cheva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Shtakarayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Utamashloke Bhakti Bhavati Naishtiki. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead, Narayan, unto Naranarayan Rishi, the supremmost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and to Srila Vyasadeva, the author. By regular attendance in classes in the Srimad Bhagavatam, and by rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service unto the personality of Godhead, whose praise is transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. It's nice to be here with all of you. I'm interested to see where today's class discussion goes. The topic today is demigod worship. I just wanted to get a little reflection on this chapter. It's such a special chapter. It's one of those chapters that if you're really studious and wanted to memorize things, memorizing this whole chapter would be totally worth it. I just thought, because we're coming towards the end of it, and I live here, so I only attended one class on this chapter. Any reflections from the chapter Divinity and Divine Service? This last, I guess, few weeks that you've been studying it.
It's definitely such a heavy hitter. There's so many verses about, there's a lot of, like, talks about cutting the knot and like, all these really beautiful things. And yeah, a heavy hitter.
Yeah, heavy hitter.
Yeah, and it's really nice. Like all parts of the Bhagavatam are nice, but this is like very sweet. It's just the essence.
Yes, that's a great word to describe it. It's definitely the essence. John.
From classes this week, from the speakers, and from what we've read, there's been a lot of applicable steps that we can do to practice bhakti yoga. So I felt like this week so far has left us with tons of things to try to work on.
Mm-hmm. So we have the essence, we have practical also. Anyone else?
I remember one particular verse, just about the perfection of doing all your duty is to please Lord Hari.
Mm-hmm.
And if by doing everything you don't like get attraction for hearing about the pastimes of Lord Hari, then it's all just useless labor.
Mm-hmm.
It's like just straight goes to the point and doesn't beat around the bush. Like this is what you meant to do.
Yeah.
If you don't do it, it's all useless.
Very, very straightforward chapter. Yeah, I agree with all these points. I like this chapter very much. I have a friend of mine, Nalachua Arvind, and when he was younger, his mother would force him to learn verses, and he hated it then, but now he appreciates it so much because he's like, now I remember all these verses and they're so amazing. And he had to remember the whole second chapter of the first canto, and during Rath Yatras he'd recite it on stage. I don't think he liked that so much, but now it's amazing. He always goes back to these verses, and they're just like solidified. There's this philosophy has become so part of his faith because of this chapter. So let's go ahead and do the Sanskrit and then follow along onwards. I'll say it once and then we call and response, and I think a few devotees chanted also. Mumukshava Gaura Rupan Mumukshava Gaura Rupan Hitva Bhuta Patinatha Narayan Kala Shanta Bhajanti hi Anusuyava Mumukshava Gaura Rupan Hitva Bhuta Patinatha Narayana Kala Shanta Bhajanti Hi Anusuyava. Would like to chant? Shanta Anyone else? Okay, let's do the word for word. Chant it together. Shivaha, curses desiring liberation. Gora, horrible, ghastly. Rupan, forms like that. Hitva, rejecting. Bhuta Patin, demigods. Atha, for this reason. Narayana, the personality of Godhead. Kala, plenary portions. Shanta, all blissful. Bhajanti, do worship. He, certainly. Anusuyava, non-envious. Translation. Those who are serious about liberation are certainly non-envious, and they respect all. Yet, they reject the horrible and ghastly forms of the demigods and worship only the all-blissful forms of Lord Vishnu and his plenary portions. Anybody like to read part of the purport? Please.
The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, who is the original person of the Vishnu categories, expands himself in two different categories, namely integrated plenary portions and separated parts and parcels. The separated parts and parcels are the servitors, and the integrated plenary portions of Vishnu Tattvas are the worshipful objects of service. All demigods who are empowered by the Supreme Lord are also separated parts and parcels. They do not belong to the categories of Vishnu Tattva. The Vishnu Tattvas are living beings equally as powerful as the original form of the personality of Godhead, and they display different categories of power in consideration of different times and circumstances. The separated parts and parcels are powerful by limitation. They do not have unlimited power like the Vishnu Tattvas. Therefore, one should never classify the Vishnu Tattvas or the plenary portions of Narayana, the personality of Godhead, in the same categories with the parts and parcels. If anyone does so, he becomes at once an offender by the name of Pashandi. In the age of Kali, many foolish persons commit such unlawful offenses and equalize the two categories. The separated parts and parcels have different positions in the estimation of material powers, and some of them are like Kala, Bharava, Shamasana, Bharava, Sani, Mahakali, and Chandika. These demigods are worshipped mostly by those who are in the lowest categories of the mode of darkness or ignorance. Other demigods like Brahma, Shiva, Surya, Ganesh, and many similar deities are worshipped by men in the mode of passion, urged by the desire for material enjoyment. But those who are actually situated in the mode of goodness, Sattva Guna, of material nature, worship only Vishnu Tattvas. Vishnu Tattvas are represented by various names and forms, such as Narayana, Damodara, Vamana, Govinda, and Arok Shaja.
Someone else want to read the rest?
Qualified Brahmanas worship the Vishnu Tattvas represented by the Shalagram Shila. And some of the higher castes like the Kshatriyas and Vaishyas also generally worship the Vishnu Tattvas. Highly qualified Brahmanas situated in the mode of goodness have no grudges against the mode of worship of others. They have all respect for the demigods, even though they may look ghastly, Kala Bhairava or Mahakali. They know very well that these horrible features of the Supreme Lord are all different servitors of the Lord under different conditions. Yet they reject the worship of both horrible and attractive features of the demigods. And they concentrate only on the forms of Vishnu because they are serious about liberation from the material conditions. The demigods, even to the stage of Brahma, the supreme of all the demigods, cannot offer liberation to anyone. Hiranyakashipu underwent a severe type of penance to become eternal in life, but his worshipful deity Brahma could not satisfy him with such blessings. Therefore, Vishnu and none else is called Muktipada, or the personality of Godhead who can bestow upon us mukti, liberation. The demigods, being like other living entities in the material world, are all liquidated at the time of annihilation of the material structure. They are themselves unable to get liberation, and what to speak of giving liberation to their devotees. The demigods can award the worshippers some temporary benefit only, and not the ultimate one. It is for this reason only that the candidates for liberation deliberately reject the worship of the demigods, although they have no disrespect for any one of them.
Om Jnana-timirandasya Niranjana-shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti-vedanta Swami Namne Namaste Saraswati Devi Gaudavani Pracharine Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Paschita Desha Panchakalpatripascha Kripasindhu Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Rama. I wanted to get a little assessment of the room when it comes to demigods and demigod worship. I know that for those who perhaps grew up in a Indian background or devotee background, the concept of demigods might be a little more familiar. If you go to India, most temples are really of different demigods. Shiva, Durga, Ganesh, prominent ones. But give me a show of hands if you had heard of the concept of demigods before becoming a devotee. Okay. A show of hands if you still don't quite understand the concept of demigods even after becoming a devotee. Okay. I sometimes get a little bit confused with it too. It's something that's a little bit not understood in the Western culture so much. I remember reading these books, Percy Jackson, when I was in middle school, and demigods meant half god, half human, had a different meaning. And I was like, oh, yes, demigod. I was hearing a class by Mahatma Prabhu on this verse. This is just the beginning of it, and he was saying, like, we don't understand this. We just said, okay, there's a god. Okay, God's Krishna. And we go that way. Demigods, it's just not in the picture. When he joined, it was just not part of the culture. But the concept of worshiping someone who is not the supreme, I think that's universal, despite which culture you come from. I think across the world, all cultures, there's in the material world a tendency to give our worship, and worship can just mean simply our time and attention, and perhaps our money and resources, to someone who is perhaps in a higher position than us, but not the Supreme Lord. Athletes, politicians, celebrities, even if you don't like them, you give them your time and attention, this is still a way of worship. So I think you might read this and think, well, we're devotees of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Radha and Krishna. This is not really a verse for us. We're not so interested in demigod worship. Maybe many of you didn't come from a background of worshiping demigods. Still, every verse in Bhagavatam can have some relevance to us and have some broad relevance. I think all of us can say perhaps we've given some worship or time and attention to someone who is not the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and maybe put them on a pedestal higher than we would put the average person, right? I wanted to talk a little bit first about how Srila Prabhupada talks about what is a demigod, who's a demigod. Once a reporter was asking Prabhupada about, are there different entities in different planets? He goes, yes. He goes, who are they? What are they like? He goes, they're called demigods. And the reporter said, what's a demigod? And he goes, they're also living entities. They're more advanced. They're highly advanced. They're more advanced than us. And Srila Prabhupada said, demigod means almost God. He's thinking, almost God. Yeah, almost God. They're controllers. God is the ultimate controller. But the controllers on a smaller level. The controllers of the universal affairs. And they're servants of God. They're devotees of God. And they have an elevated position. So nothing, just like in this world, we have different departments. At the University of Florida, there's so many departments. By department head. So on the universal department, the universe is under ultimately the control of the Supreme Lord, but they're different department heads, and that's the demigods. That was Prabhupada's explanation. So why respect the demigods? Well, there's a couple answers for that. One, as Vaishnavas, we respect all Vaishnavas, and we give praise to all Vaishnavas. And if we do the opposite, it's a really bad offense. It really stomps the creepers of our bhakti entirely. So the demigods they're highly advanced devotees. They take on a lot of responsibility for Krishna. And some demigods are super, super advanced. We hear in Bhagavatam that of the most advanced devotee is Lord Shiva. So it's important that as Vaishnavas, we respect other Vaishnavas, and we don't see the demigods as, even though, yes, it does say here, we reject the horrible and ghastly forms, yet we're non-envious and we respect all. But there's another example Prabhupada gives that I like a lot. And he says, if you were to respect the police, to obey the police department, if you got pulled over, you would listen to what the police said. If you respected the police department, you would follow the traffic laws, you would follow the speed limit. There's certain things you would do. And by obeying the police, by obeying the rules and regulations put by them, you are actually obeying the government because they're part of the government. So on a grander scale, you can see the demigods in this way. They're like ambassadors for Krishna. And by showing respect for them and respect for what they give us, then we're actually showing respect for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We're showing respect for Krishna. So if we actually disrespect the demigods, in this way we disrespect the Supreme Lord. So it's very, very important that we do respect the demigods. Yet they reject the horrible and ghastly forms, a little intense, right, of the demigods, and worship only the all blissful forms of Lord Vishnu. Why is this? I think there's one devotee told me in Srimad Bhagavatam, it says many things directly. What we hear here is a direct statement, but Bhagavatam also says many things indirectly. It infers to something else by what it's saying. So basically, this is saying they reject the horrible and ghastly forms of the demigods and worship the all blissful forms of Lord Vishnu. So by rejecting the demigods or worship the demigods, the question then becomes, then who are they worshiping? Who are we accepting, or whose worship do we accept as the actual worship? And that is Bhagavan. So I think to understand why we don't worship the demigods or why they don't fall in that category of supremacy, it's a really good chance to glorify Krishna and to understand who is Krishna in Tattva and why actually philosophically demigods cannot be on the same platform. So Srila Prabhupada uses an absolutely brilliant definition of this word Bhagavan. I think in this chapter, Bhagavan was defined, right, a few verses back. covered. I thought it was so fascinating. So, Srila Prabhupada says the definition of Bhagavan as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, right? So I wanted to go into each of these three words and explain why it's just so brilliant and wonderful. So, and why his definition, other definitions you'd hear often of Bhagavan is Blessed Lord, or even as simple as God, but they don't offer a specific technical definition well enough to define Supreme Personality of Godhead as one, and as Krishna, and the others as someone subsidiary and lower. So Godhead refers to divinity or Godhood. So he is of that divinity, he is the head. And there can only be one, there's only one supreme. So he's the supreme of the category of divinity, right? It's a category of Godhood. But the most important quality of his supremacy is that he is a personality. So these three aspects must be there. If you take out any of these, it doesn't fully define God. There's the aspect of divinity, there's the aspect of supremacy, and the aspect of personality. Because one could say, okay, divinity, but in one sense, the demigods also have divinity, right? They also show godly categories. Aren't they part of this category of Godhead? And if you just stop the definition of God right there in divinity, then people can easily say, well, then Lord Shiva also God. Brahma also God. You know? Ganesh, Durga also God. Why can I not worship them? But no, supreme, one. I'll speak about this a little more. Okay, then you can say then just energy. That's also God. But no, the most important quality is personality. So it's such an amazing definition. And so Prabhupada uses these same words over and over, Supreme Personality of Godhead. What is that? Supreme Personality of Godhead. Why not just God? Why not just Blessed Lord? And sometimes we use these words interchangeably, but if you ask Prabhupada, what is Bhagavan? You won't just say God, you say the Supreme Personality of Godhead. These are such important definitive terms that separate Krishna in this category from any other god or demigod, any other being. And so there's also there's certain qualities of Bhagavan, Supreme Personality of Godhead, that put him in a category of his own. And I want to explain these two. This is offered by Jiva Goswami in Sandarbhas. And what it does is by understanding this, you understand very technically and philosophically how no one else can be in this category. So he says that Supreme Personality Bhagavan must be one, aprakrita. That means he can't be material. He has to be spiritual by nature. Has to be everything. Him and everything around him must be Satchit Ananda. And then he must be Svabhavika. And that means everything must be part of his own Svabhava, part of his own nature, inherent to him. Nothing, him or nothing, a part of him can come from another source. It has to come from him. So I wanted to take a little example and to understand this and then apply that to demigods and understand why, technically, logically speaking, so if we ever are preaching and someone comes to you and very strongly says, no, so-and-so demigod, Supreme Personality of Godhead, you would be able to the basic minute particle, prove them wrong. So if you took something that's part of Krishna, right, if everything connected to Krishna is part of him, let's take his dhoti, for example. Okay, if you took Krishna's dhoti, or even let's start with his form. If you take Krishna's form, that's essential to his own nature, right? So our form or our clothing, all these things, they're designations, they're upadis, they're not really us. So in one sense, they are subject to decay, they're material, where our eternal spirit is full of bliss, is full of knowledge, is eternal. The things around us, my dhoti, my body, it's not. With Krishna, this is not the case. So if you took his dhoti, and if you said, okay, let's imagine that Krishna's dhoti is material, it's subject to decay, then that by definition means that he cannot be Bhagavan, because everything associated with him has to be a prakrita, it has to be non-material. It has to be of spiritual nature. Look at the demigods, for example. This is clearly here. They can't actually award liberation because they're also subject to the multi-material nature. They themselves, they're on a higher platform. They have, to a certain extent, a certain percentage of the qualities of the Supreme Lord, but they're not full on all 64 qualities. So not everything associated with them is spiritual, right? It's easy to say for us, okay, yeah, my body is not, it's decays, it's going to die, and my clothes are going to rip. These are subject to decay. The same goes for the demigods, but according to definition of being Supreme Personality of Godhead, everything around him, part of him, cannot actually be material. It has to be spiritual. Take that same dhoti and consider the second point. Everything has to be connected to him. Sabhavika has to be part of his own nature. That means that if this dhoti was not part of his nature, if this dhoti did not come from him, it came from another source, and that poses a problem, then there is another source competing to be the supreme. Because how can you be the supreme original and topmost if there's something that doesn't come from you? Being topmost means that everything must emanate, must come from you. So if this dhoti was not actually Swabhavika, part of his nature, then that dhoti competes for his position as supreme. You get that? Now there's two. There's Krishna and his dhoti. Which one's supreme? Because not one is coming from the other. And that's why Srila Prabhupada so often says the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or Krishna, is one without a second. You heard that? One without a second. Is one reality. It's absolute. There's no second. Everything comes from him. It's just one. But look at us, for example. Everything is relative in our case. I'm not one without a second. I'm one with a second, and a third, and a fourth. I came to Krishna house because I'm relative to the car that I drive, relative to this place existing. Otherwise, I would not be here. I don't exist on my own accord. I'm relative to my parents having me, and therefore I'm born. I'm not, I'm relative to the fact this material world exists, so that I can have a birth in this material world. There's so many things I'm relative to. But in Krishna's case, everything it's absolute. These things aren't relative, they come from him. And you understand from Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, this is the process of his energies. Krishna's energies are what facilitate his own spiritual world and a material world. So things can be him and not him at the same time. So you take the demigods, for example, they're dependent on Krishna. They're not one without a second. They are not independent. They're actually dependent on the Supreme Lord because they come from him. And things that they produce ultimately are not their own energy. It's Krishna's energy. So if you look at these 2 points, and you look at Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he's the only person that can have everything around him be aprakrita, which means non-material, and of his own nature, Svabhavika. No one else can have these features. The demigods can't, we can't. And so I think that's very, very important on a philosophical level to understand why demigod worship, just on a logical, philosophical level, is not the highest, because they don't fulfill these requirements. There's a really wonderful verse in the third chapter of this canto that makes a very declarative statement that's so important. It's Krishna stu Bhagavan Svayam. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And it's so important to establish this because the whole Bhagavatam is in relation to the one Supreme Personality of Godhead. And in that verse, in the purport, it starts talking about Krishna is full in all 64 qualities. He's full in all 6 opulences. And different degrees of expansions, plenary expansions, they hold different percentages of this quality. right? So they hold that his Vishnu Tattva expansions hold up to 93% of these qualities. Lord Shiva, who falls between that Tattva and the Jiva Tattva, holds up to 84%. And the living entities, the Jivas, can hold up to 78%, which Lord Brahma does, but us in the material world often much, much, much less. Or in the, on earth, we call it Yuga. So this is demigod worship in relation to the Supreme Personality of God. I know that was very philosophical. I wasn't originally planning to be very philosophical with this approach, but I thought that was, for me, very important because naturally I don't have really an affinity to see a demigod as the Supreme Personality of God. And when I look around the room, I feel that perhaps most of you in this room don't. I see the devotion you have towards Gaura Nitai, the way you chant, the way you in kirtan, the way you inquire about Krishna in class. And I know that your affinity is for Krishna. But then there's going to be times that hopefully this doubt doesn't creep up, but also times where you're going to have to engage with an audience that doesn't believe the same as you. You're going to engage with an audience that finds supremacy in demigods. And I think it's really important to understand philosophically why is Krishna the supreme? Why is Bhagavan different from the demigods? Does anybody remember the second offense to the holy name? Is it? Yeah. Yes. Consider the names of demigods like Lord Brahma or Lord Shiva to be equal to or independent of the holy name of Vishnu. So this is mentioned in Srila Prabhupada's purport to today's verse also. Let's think about this. To consider the names of Brahma, to demigods like Brahma and Lord Shiva to be equal to or independent of. So we talked about that here. They can't actually be equal to because they don't possess the same quality. They can't actually even award us liberation, what to speak of, entrance into the spiritual abode, which is not their own abode. They're trying to do the same thing. They're also meditating on Krishna. But they can't be independent of. And this I found so fascinating. They can't be independent of. If you're dependent on someone, how can you be supreme? Right? There's nothing wrong with being dependent on somebody. We're all striving here to realize our dependency on God, through Vaishnavas. But why should we put someone on the utmost platform when they themselves are depending on someone else? That should be a clear sign of, oh, you're so elevated, you're depending on somebody. Who are you depending on? Who is giving you your source of strength? Hiranyakashipu is the example given. He worshipped Lord Brahma. He wanted to become independent, but he went to someone who's dependent. He instead said, I can't make you eternal. I'm not even eternal. For example, Brahma's there and Hiranyakashipu's all this austerities. He hates Vishnu, hates his guts. He thinks, okay, I want to be supreme. So he goes to someone who's not supreme. Brahma says this, and not really a surprising answer, but he's so fixated that no, I won't accept that Vishnu is supreme. So he thinks he can outsmart Vishnu, he thinks he can outsmart Brahma, and say all these roundabout ways to become eternal. But it fails in the end. It doesn't work because even the person he's worshiping is dependent on someone else. And then we realize that these demigods are not just depending on Krishna, but they're faithful devotees. And then you go, oh, they're faithful devotees. And so maybe I can learn something from them. So really the demigod should be a stepping stone for us to realize who is really supreme and how do they worship and how can I also worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because we both come from the same source. So that's why it's an offense to consider equal to or independent of. It's an offense to the demigods also, not just Vishnu. I want to speak about liberation briefly. It said those who are serious about liberation, they don't worship the demigods. And I want to speak what real liberation is, because you'll hear the word liberation defined in a broader term in Bhagavatam, more specific also in terms of devotional service to Krishna. But Srila Prabhupada always defined liberation as being reinstated in your position of serving Krishna eternally. That's always the definition of liberation. And read you a short story and then up for some questions. I know it's late. But this is from Brihad Bhagavatamrita, which is a really nice book. Real short, it's about a boy from Govardhan who's got this mantra he got from a guru, and he's trying to find the deity of his mantra, Gopal. And by chanting that mantra with so much faith, so much love and desire to see Gopal, he goes all over the universe and becomes every single position that he can possibly become. So this section is when he's in Brahmaloka and he actually takes the post of Lord Brahma, but he's so unsatisfied that he's seeking more. So I'll just read from there. Once hearing the residents of Brahmaloka glorify someone who had attained liberation here on earth, I asked him about that amazing event. So he had no idea what liberation was. I heard from those all-knowing sages about the super excellence and rareness of liberation. So I desired it myself. I asked how liberation can be obtained. Many of the presiding goddesses of the Upanishads answered. So he got all the different shastras, all have personalities. So he brought all these personalities. In my head, I just think of books with feet and hands coming together. So he gathered them all up. And they said that only by knowledge is liberation achieved, and no other means. But some Puranas and Agamas said gravely that this knowledge, difficult to obtain, is easily acquired by devotional service to the personality of Godhead. Some other Shrutis and Smritis indirectly showed agreement amongst themselves that by devotional service alone, properly done, liberation is easy to obtain. Angry at not hearing those Shrutis and Smritis speak up, some of the great Upanishads and the scriptures of the Agamas who follow in their footsteps openly affirm that devotional service is an independent cause of liberation. So the more devotional Upanishads and scriptures are getting a little bit upset at this. What do you mean that bhakti is a means to liberation? Liberation is simply a byproduct. Bhakti is independent. So this conversation, this argument between all these shastras is going on. Gopakumar is watching this, trying to understand what is liberation. A few confidential Upanishads smiled and kept silent, along with some confidential major Agamas and Puranas. A fierce debate then arose between the Agamas on one side and scriptures like certain Shrutis and Puranas on the other about whether or not liberation is achieved merely by chanting mantras that worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Unable to tolerate the debate, the Puranas and Agamas and Upanishads who had been silent covered their ears and left. Then the major Puranas and Upanishads became arbitrators, and so victory went to the Agamas. That pleased me very much. Discerning the inner mood of the Puranas and Agamas, other scriptures who had left the debate, I pacified them with tactful praise and brought them back to the assembly. So, like Bhagavatam and more of the devotional scriptures, who couldn't handle this discussion of bhakti leads to liberation, and liberation is the end goal. They know that bhakti is so much higher and liberation is so much smaller. It's from those scriptures, the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Sattvata Siddhanta, and other Agamas, and their foremost Shrutis, I respectfully asked about the truth of the matter, and they replied. The devotional scriptures said, "O dear one, who have achieved the post of Brahma, this topic is more secret than a rare treasure. But we shall explain it to you because your abundant good qualities inspire us to speak freely. We who are dedicated to the personality of Godhead's devotional service may sometimes discuss liberation, but only to encourage people to reject it completely. When we speak of liberation, we condemn it and everything that goes with it. To describe the ultimate glories of devotional service, we may sometimes speak highly of moksha, liberation, but we do not intend to acclaim moksha, the final goal of spiritual discipline, because in moksha, there is even not a trace of real happiness." So really, real liberation means devotional, pure devotional, unalloyed service to Krishna, because devotees are after that rasa, the relationship with Krishna. That's real liberation. And so that becomes clear in Bhagavatam more and more. When we see this, those who are serious about liberation, it really means those who are serious about pure devotional service to Krishna. And ultimately, I think the reason why this is the ultimate philosophy that's given, but we have to understand, is this our goal? Do we actually want this pure, unalloyed devotional service, this relationship with Krishna? If we do, then it's actually obvious that, of course, we'll reject demigod worship. It just makes total sense. But for those who desire materialistic things, they go to the demigods. For those whose goal is on a different level, if we're not actually desiring pure devotional service to Krishna, then I guess it makes sense in that way. Oh, maybe I'll just worship somebody else. But when our goal is so fixed that, yeah, I want real liberation, I want real happiness by serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then actually this becomes a no-brainer. Yeah, so that's all I have on this topic. And I'd love to hear from your thoughts.
Thank you. So many questions have come up. I have a list, but I just want to ask my topmost one is like, can you illustrate for us or define for us like what it looks like to worship a demigod?
I never really worshipped demigods, so I don't know. And I'm not so. I just guess growing up in a devotee family and devotee, Krishna conscious culture, never really did much. Never really seen so much. I wonder, Nita, if you've seen more as growing up in India, and explain a little bit more about this.
Said we sometimes offer worship and attention, time and attention to other people who are like celebrities and athletes, and we celebrate their days, their achievements, their birthdays. So similarly, in India, they have festivals like Durga Puja where they celebrate goddess Durga. There's a 10 days festival where basically like you're doing deity worship. They have a lot of deities of Durga in different places. They offer her arti, they give them like basically the same things that you see in a temple. They offer bhoga and they eat the prasad afterwards, and everyone comes together, like has darshan, they sing some praises of the goddess. Similarly for Shiva that is there, for Ganesh there's a different one. It's also for Kartikeya, not our friend, but demigod, they have some like worship for him. Yeah, so for goddess Kali, it's there. So it's similar thing that we do for Krishna, they just extend that to these other gods.
Up 2 questions, because then my follow-up question is, okay, so it's the illustration, it's kind of like puja and holidays and feasting, fasting, and all those things. Okay, so you had said like it's important for us to understand the supremacy, basically Krishna, what it means for him to be the fountainhead. Everything comes from him. So like why not just we focus on the source? And then but also that like these other personalities can be seen as stepping stones, you know. But I was just wondering, it's like, okay, so we came from devotional background, like we believe in Krishna, we believe in Srila Prabhupada, but then like if you go to India, you're gonna eventually meet somebody that's like, no, you know, Ganesh and this spiritual master, he brought, you know, these texts, and this is why you should worship Ganesh and everything. So my question is like, at some point, it's not okay to just like give somebody just be like, you know, I'm glad that they're God conscious. They believe in something. I'm not going to convince them, you know, to like change who they believe they should learn from. Or, and also some, you know, a high personality that they found those things that, you know, you can find in believing in God, which is like peace of mind and faith and like some, you know, serenity during hard times. It's hard. It's going to be hard to debate somebody out of that. You know what I mean? So
yeah, I think so too. I personally am not a much of a challenging personality. You know, I don't have that. If I go somewhere and I'm a bit of a challenger, disruptor of personality. Not that it's a bad thing, but it's just not so much. I think there is someone's on the path of worshiping demigods. It is better than being on the path of being an atheist. And if you're in a situation where you can show them the taste of devotional service, I think by conviction, when someone's very convinced in their ways of this is my lineage through so and so demigod, and this is what I believe in, some random person from the US telling them that's wrong probably may not have much of an effect. But I think the taste of chanting Hare Krishna has so much potency beyond our conviction that if we're in a scenario like that and we're trying to do something to help this person realize without being offensive, without even knowing much about them, engaging in devotional service together is such and you can be in a kirtan together. It's so powerful. It's so amazing. And you'll go to India and you'll even in Brajan and you'll see demigod worship also, and often the Brajavasis see this as these are gateways to Krishna. The gopis who worship demigods to Krishna also. Perhaps not every Brajavasi has that mood, but when we do approach demigods, we do go to a temple, offer your respects, offer your water to Lord Shiva, pray for entrance to Vrindavan Dham, pray for blessings, for mercy, consider them great elevated souls. Really, one of the gatekeepers of Vrindavan is Lord Shiva. The gatekeeper of the rasa dance is Lord Shiva. And this is how Vaishnava sees Lord Shiva specifically, and other demigods as well, and what they've done to give us the opportunity of devotional service. It's actually very, very great. Thank you. That's for the
point of what you said. To be, you're still on the path. If you're worshiping demigods, you're still on the path. Though, when in the path of bhakti and worshiping from a relative space, people are going to be at different places. And we talked about this in Sri Upanishad class yesterday, that, if to worship demigods, that might be perfect for where they're at. And it's beautiful that they're taking the opportunity where they could be doing anything else to be meeting their level of consciousness by doing this worship. If you're a devotee of Krishna, you know the Supreme. Like, go to the Supreme. Don't go seeking material substance devoted to Ganesh. And so I think the compassion of just being able to meet demigod worshippers as they are, instead of like, let me just tell you why Krishna is the Supreme. Just bust up your whole gig. It's people on the path are on the path, and it's a beautiful thing regardless. Though the standard that we hold as Vaishnavas, we've seen the higher tips.
Thank you for that comment. Thank you. This last question.
I just wanted to say, I once heard someone, speaking on how devotion and service is above liberation. And I was like, wait, now that I know that, I don't even, liberation, I'm already on a platform that doing something that's above liberation. And it made me just relax in bhakti so much more. I'm like, man, I'm already above liberation.
That's a round of applause. Above liberation. It's true. You'll the more you read Vaishnava scriptures and sentiments of great devotees, you'll see they never did. It's just like, liberation. I don't want that. Krishna's lotus feet, and that's it. It's time. Oh, we have 10 more minutes. Okay, great.
Yeah, it's great because I love that we have 10 more minutes.
Okay, great. This is going to be a challenging one.
Because a lot of things you said, Prabhu, were very. I wanted to comment. I had so many questions come up because demigod worship is not something that's always really drawn out, especially in the classes and stuff. And I really liked your point about. I realized like the desire to be famous. That's us wanting worship. we want people's time and attention.
Yeah.
I've never put it that way. But that was like when I use the word worship, I'm like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, right. And even the brand Supreme, like have you seen that? Okay. And yeah, my second question was like the demigods are great devotees of the Lord. Yeah. But how come they don't like do they go back to Golok Vrindavan after this life? How should we like think of that? And it also brought up a cool point of like look, Krishna, I'm raising the sun for you every day. And and then how like small what we do is, but it's not about how much you do, it's about how you do it.
Yeah, I'll answer in terms of this book, Brihad Bhagavatamrita, because these are posts. These are actually they're positions, because you see here, Gopakumar is following his mantra, and his journey doesn't have to be identical to all of our journeys. But it's what's nice about Sanatana Goswami describing his journey is that he goes to every single possible spot upwards to Goloka Vrindavan. And he goes to every level of the material universe. And he holds the position, the highest position of the demigods in each of those levels, and specifically, namely Brahma or Indra and Brahma. Right? So knowing that these are positions, that they have the opportunity to elevate, go back to God. Do I know if each one does? I don't. But in regards to your point of their service is very big and grand, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the goal is to move up in this way. Okay, we have a higher form of service, or a bigger responsibility in the cosmic manifestation, therefore that's moving up in devotional service. And that's shown by Gopakumar, because he goes from all these more and more grand and larger forms of responsibility and service on a cosmic level, but really, one, that unsatisfies him, and two, just the chanting of his mantra to Gopal brings him to moves him past that, which that in itself shows that his chanting is actually a higher devotional service than what holding those larger responsibilities are, because it's taking him past that. Even though he's in those responsible posts, he's acting as Indra, he's acting as Brahma, but that chanting is actually taking him closer and closer to Krishna at a much faster pace than those responsibilities is. So we talk about, okay, what we do might seem small in one eyes in terms of responsibility of the cosmic manifestation, but really you see from him that this pure, unalloyed chanting, hankering for Krishna, and chanting his names is so much more dear in a sense. It brings him so quickly and so close to Krishna, to the point he finally comes to Krishna. Krishna says, "Where were you? I've been waiting for you for so long." He gives him an embrace. Whereas, that could happen through the other services. And perhaps the only answer I have for that is the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and our acharyas, that we can actually have that process. It's so confidential. Chanting in bhakti is so confidential that you'd be surprised that even in the heavenly planets, it's not what we know, what we do. It's not something that perhaps even they do there. To the point that Srila Prabhupada would say, the demigods, they come down. This was, I think, Atlanta, if I'm not mistaken. Perhaps it happened multiple times. Srila Prabhupada was leading a kirtan. And after he said, "Hey, did you not notice? Narad Muni was present, so-and-so devatas are present." Or it says in the Gaur Arti song, Adi Deva Gane, that these personalities from the heavenly planets, they come during this Arti and Mahaprabhu to witness it. We're so lucky to have this, that I think even them in that position don't have that opportunity that we have from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's what came to mind. Yes.
Thank you for class. It sparked so many things that I really couldn't even keep track of. I guess my question is, does this make sense? My next statement. I think there's almost a demonizing and fear of the demigods. Like, don't go to them if you're looking for bliss and to find out your constitutional position and be service of Krishna, liberation. They're kind of almost the same thing. It's like, but bhakti is liberation in your service. But I think these demigods were given these positions because they held Krishna in such high regard, and they can be given power without forgetting that Krishna was the doer. Yeah. So if you approach Lord Shiva for a Lamborghini, he gives you the Lamborghini, and then you're driving around thinking, I'm the boss, I'm the man, I did this, and you immediately have fallen. So there's almost a fear to approach the demigods because they might give you exactly what you want, and then you'll become fallen. Yeah. So there's just like, do you know yourself? Can you actually handle more responsibility and more power without forgetting the Lord? Yeah. I can guarantee you that I cannot. Because if I was given $1 billion, well, who am I really with all that money? Right. But I do pray for the qualifications and the strength to be awarded such opulence and be able to hold Krishna in my mind and not get distracted by shiny gold objects or something. Yeah.
In a sense, I understand your point of view, that there's a fear of perhaps approaching demigods because demigods understand that one approaches them who desires something material, and that if we can't handle that, there's a fear that by desiring that, it keeps us in this cycle of birth and death, keeps us in the material world. But I think it's not to say that what the demigods can give, Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot give. The same thing. If we want a Lamborghini, and we approach Krishna, he's not going to do it. I can't. I don't have the ability to do it. Shiva's got all the Lamborghini stock on his side. But I think the statement that people approach the demigods for something material is because they don't have spiritual aspirations. Not that they feel that Krishna can't give that, but they feel that their aspirations only go so high. So the mere fact that you're feeling, okay, a little hesitancy to approach a demigod for something material because I feel I won't be able to handle that because it will inhibit me from doing something spiritual. I think in a sense that shows that you already have an idea that I actually don't want something material in the first place, right? So if we're approaching a demigod, or if people are approaching demigods, then we have to understand that it's just, there's the goal that they have is not as refined as what we can get by approaching Krishna, or it's not as refined to want the association of Krishna. If that makes sense at all.
Yeah, the word refined is these are lower level desires, and to want to be with Krishna in service is a higher taste. It's just better for you. And then Krishna could give you these things, but they might come in a way that you don't exactly. Oh, I had, like he gives you what you want ultimately, but it's not always just what you expect it to be.
And it's not as black and white in the sense that everyone who worships Shiva is a multimillionaire because it's like a vending machine of some sort. I think there's also the karma plays into it and so many factors. So the approach, we can approach demigods for we have certain material desires and things like that. And it's often what happens, but it's not like they're automatic, like ATM machines or something. It's definitely more nuanced because there's so many factors. There's our own karma, but just that intention in and of itself is a much lower goal. And that was my last point I wanted to make. It really just boils down to goal. And when we stick on the path of bhakti to Krishna, that in itself starts purifying our goal more and more, because we're not going to come in a totally pure way and say, we have needs as humans also. We may present that, but we try our best to not present use Krishna as some kind of order supplier. To try to serve him and try to purify ourselves through service. Staying on the path of bhakti to Krishna, not on the path of trying to serve and get from demigods, that in itself purifies us. But if we stay in the path of only trying to worship demigods, or kind of a give and take sort of attitude, that actually won't purify us. If you're saying it would degrade us, become more and more attached. That's the beauty of path of bhakti to Krishna. Even though we try, every service that's offered is held in great esteem by the Lord. He notices it. It's not diminished. So it purifies us through that process.
The act itself is purifying from those desires.
Yeah.
There's so many sort of ones. That kind of purifying itself, like itself, that
Right.
Then you get almost
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like,
And what you're describing is called self-realization. That's it. You're starting to realize the self past the layers that we put on us. That's the desires we have, the needs we think we have. And when we approach solely demigods and we even approach God, and we're wanting these bodies, these coverings, these designations we place on ourselves, we're not uncovering the layers. We're perhaps adding more layers, and that's binding. That's staying in the material realm. But then by practicing bhakti, that's purification. We start covering those layers. We start seeing what's underneath. We start realizing, oh yeah, actually I am. This is scary, but I'm something more than my desires, my thoughts. Something more than what I give myself a designation of who I am. That's what bhakti can award. That's what it can give. And then when you come to that, then you realize, okay, it's not just about liberation. It's actually about service to who I am part of, and who I've always had a relationship with. Right? So then it becomes more and more clear. How we can practice. Jai, thank you so much. Ventura Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Jai.
Which infers the faith in God of God, the spiritual eminence of the Lord. Indeed, the HG Rama Govinda, the supreme personality of Godhead, and the transcendental Krishna and the best. Bhagavatam ki.
Yeah, such a thought-provoking class. I really have. I had some realizations from it. It's very good. Thank you.
I didn't know if I was speaking on the track and what the topic was. I was trying to bring this like philosophical conception back to that question something. So basically I've been listening to a seminar that first. It's really fascinating. It's very philosophical. And listening to it interesting. So a lot of what I say is on that. And this was like, oh, maybe this would be it all that was on my mind. So,
Yeah, even about being like we're relative to our car, relative to our family, and sometimes like especially with the philosophical things, it's like sometimes you've heard it a million times, but just when it's said slightly different, like actually hits. You know?
It was really interesting hearing him speak because there's certain terms I've heard so often, specifically the supreme personality of Godhead, absolute truth, and one without a second. I didn't understand what they really meant, but I was like, oh, like that's what I was like. One without a second, like second of time. What does it mean? One without a second. Oh yeah. Absolute, a second means that one is in relation to another. He says he's one without us. He's the one. We're coming from him. But us, we're the one. We have everything's we're coming from different sources. I was like, oh, that's why that means the personality of God. It's really interesting because this is really strong takes his models of philosophy, using all kinds of philosophical angles, and And so he gets really, really into it. I haven't read some of the books yet. It seemed quite like dense and philosophical, but this was a nice entrance way to understand it. I don't know if you ever heard about it.
Maybe.
He's a devotee he's an Oxford professor, scholar. So he has a very academic way of looking at things, but he's also really good at saying words. So he presents these really like complicated philosophical points, really understandable. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and I've never heard of the book that you read today.
Yeah, this is really nice. It's by Sanatana Goswami, and he's relaying a conversation that Parikshit Maharaj summarizes the essence of the Bhagavatam to his mother. Get that right? I think so. And basically, it's two stories. One is Narada Muni trying to understand the supermost recipient of mercy. He has his journey, and he has so many lessons along the way. It's like, why do you think there's recipient? And they say, I believe I'm not because of this, but of this person. And then the second large part is about this boy who has this mantra and he's going all around trying to understand who's the deity of my mantra, who's Gopal. And the irony is that he's from Govardhan, but he doesn't realize that this Gopal is the super personality of God that he's after. And he goes everywhere and nothing satisfies him, not even direct contact with Lord Vishnu.
Wow.
It's really, really book. 2 parts. It's the second.
Yeah, it seems a little, maybe in 10 years.
That's always there. I always find that like books that seem about my great because they're a little bit more complicated than that. I always like hearing a lecture on it or some kind of summary. Not so I understand what it's about, even if I haven't read it. Because then the speaker will bring it down to a level that you like.